Welcome to another Judy Brooks Conversation Series program. We are just kicking these out left and right, and we are so excited today to be having one that Andrea is going to do the introductions for Lev. I just want to remind everyone that all of our other past conversation programs are recorded and they are on the League of Women Voters website. So there's a whole archive of them and they're really very excellent. We encourage you to tell people about them, and we're always trying to get more numbers of people participating and being part of the discussion and learning about what's going on in our area. So the next one that is already planned is in January 18th at 7 p.m. And it's our very own Sudha Sethi, who has left Amherst and moved to New York City. She's the dean of the law school at SUNY Law School. And she will be speaking about democracy. I don't have the title for her program yet, but it was a request of our own David Williams that we really do focus in January on democracy as a legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we just are happy you're here and want you to have a good time. So Andrea, oh yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay.
Great, and now I will do some more spotlighting. Okay. The spotlight thing is pretty cool.
Okay. Hi, Liv.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm very excited about this because we have a wonderful guest, BenEzra, who is the executive director of the Amherst Survival Center here. Lev has 15 years of nonprofit leadership experience developing and leading innovative and effective community-based programs focused on workforce development, youth leadership, systems change, and food security. She was grateful to join the Amherst Survival Center community in January 2019. Wow, it's been that long. Finding that the center is the perfect place to combine her passion for social justice, her commitment to making resources to meet basic needs accessible for all, and her skill in bringing people together to accomplish big goals. Since becoming the Amherst Survival Center's fourth executive director almost 4 years ago, she has led the organization to scale and adapt to rising need, particularly during the pandemic. Over the last few years, the Amherst Survival Center has more than doubled the amount of food provided to the community, expanded services to include a robust grocery delivery program, and made numerous changes to make the center more accessible, welcoming, and effective for all who come. She holds an MS in nonprofit management. So anyway, saying that, we also think she is fabulous and is really good at this job, as I'm sure she has been with all of her jobs. And the title of her address is the Amherst Survival Center, Understanding and Addressing Food Insecurity. And we thought it was a pretty important title, a pretty important thing to look at. So I'm handing it over to you, Lev.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your kind words, Andrea, and for the invitation to join this fabulous group. Many familiar faces in the audience and a few folks who I don't know, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity to meet and connect with here. So I'm really looking forward to taking a bit of time tonight to talk about what food insecurity is and perhaps what it isn't, and then specifically what we're doing at the Amherst Survival Center to meet it at a really concrete emergency level. And then am also hoping to be able to turn it back over to the group for questions and answer about certainly about anything related to the center specifically, but also really thinking about addressing the root causes and what is really necessary to address food insecurity locally and regionally and across the country. But again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I am going to share my screen. Can somebody confirm that you're seeing just a couple of pictures and not like the other page of notes?
That's right. We're
Okay.
seeing, yeah, it's perfect.
Fabulous. Okay, so here we are. We're in the right place. So yeah, so the Amherst Survival Center, and I am Lev, which we already know. So the first question that we're posing this evening is, what is food insecurity? And the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, defines food insecurity as the lack of consistent access to enough food for an active or healthy life. Hunger is the individual experience, the personal sensation that I am hungry, or also it's used to, obviously, as we've heard, to refer to the more pervasive experience of being consistently hungry. But food insecurity really indicates this overall lack of available resources, most often financial, though certainly it can be access or otherwise, at the household level, and that lack of available resources to alleviate hunger. So the difference, of course, being sort of, it's late, I'm hungry, I haven't eaten yet. Okay, let me go, and my refrigerator has food in it, and let me make myself a meal, and now I'm not hungry anymore. Versus this overall experience of not having the resources to do that. And the most common questions, there are a couple of different tools that are used to assess this, but a couple of the most common are really just these two questions that ask at any time in the last 12 months, have you run out of food before you could buy more? Or have you or your family run out of food before you could buy more? And at any time in the last 12 months, have you worried that you would run out of food before you could buy more? And I think that the second question is so essential, and one that we really underestimate the impact, the emotional energy and the stress that is taken up by folks who are experiencing food insecurity, worrying about where they are going to find the resources to meet this most essential, most basic need. And so when I think about, and when I came to the Amherst Survival Center and we were literally looking at what we were doing, I think this was this question that prompted me, is like, what would it actually look like, not just to provide some food or a little bit of something or help someone today, but what does it actually mean to ensure food security so that folks in our community who are experiencing food insecurity are able to take those limited financial resources and that mental bandwidth, that emotional energy, and invest it elsewhere. And I think this is a really important question for us to be considering as a broader community. Like, who are we missing out on in local elected office? Who are we missing out on in the League of Women Voters? Who are we missing out on in active participation in our schools or in supporting their kids in XYZ way, or all these different things, because this is where the energy of so many people are going. And so I think that's really important, to be really holding and recognizing that constant stress and really long-term trauma that comes from experiencing food insecurity. And food insecurity certainly leads to unhealthy food choices. If you don't have the money, you're buying what you can instead of necessarily what you want or what would be most healthy for you or for your family. I talked significantly already about fear, stress, the negative psychological outcomes. And then the other component of that we think about a lot are just the series of impossible choices. Do I pay for food or do I put gas in the car? If I don't put gas to the car, how do I get to work? If I don't get to work, what do I have money and how am I going to pay for food? Do I pay for food or do I pay for rent? How many times can I be late on my rent before we're going to face eviction? Or when can I get my next, rent relief from some resource? Food or medicine? Can I scrimp and save or take this medication that I need every other day so that I don't have to refill it, because otherwise I'm not going to have enough money? And that those are huge factors in really household instability that is a direct result of food insecurity. And here in Western Massachusetts, and I will talk about Amherst specifically as well, I think we live in a really interesting place in the country in terms of we live in a space with enormous wealth disparity. We have enormous amounts of wealth, and we also have really significant poverty. And we see that in dramatically increasing school lunch numbers statewide. We can see that 50% increase in school lunch between 2005 and 2020. We also see really high housing prices, particularly this rent burden. Massachusetts is third in the country in terms of that rent burden as a percentage of household income. And in fact, 62% of Amherst renters qualify as being rent burden, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income on rent. Whereas for homeowners, this number in Amherst is 32%. And so that's an example of that really increased burden on people who already have less economic means, more represented in our renter population. And certainly we are seeing dramatically increased demand at food pantries. I can share at the Amherst Survival Center that the last 6 or 7 months in our food pantry, we have seen numbers that exceeded our highest pandemic surges. This year in October, we had I think it was a 24% increase over October of the previous year, really amidst, and it was more than that of October of 2020. So we are seeing really dramatic increases now in 2022 than we were even during our peak pandemic surges, which were already significantly higher than prior to the pandemic. And I hesitate to provide so many of these statistics, but I think that it's important for us to grapple with this actual question of like how many of our neighbors and how many of our kids' classmates in schools and how many of us sitting here on this call and how many of us that we, whatever, run into at the library or are walking down the street with, whoever it is, are in fact grappling with this. That again, recent data from Project Bread indicated that just shy of 20% of Hampshire County residents were facing food insecurity. But just take a look at those increases. That number was 8.2% in 2019 and 16.6% at the highest pandemic peak. And we're now at 19.6%. And that number is even higher, 21.5% most recently in Hampshire County families with kids. And those numbers are even higher in Amherst specifically versus Hampshire County as a whole. And so in addition to that, meaning that 1 in 5 of our neighbors in Hampshire County are experiencing food insecurity, and that number is closer to 1 in 3 people in Amherst are experiencing food insecurity. Also, what that means is that a whole lot of those people are experiencing food insecurity for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. We have a lot of folks right now, and a lot of Amherst residents, a lot of Hampshire County residents who are grappling with some of these challenges and this just reality of not making ends meet within their household budgets for the first time or for the first time in a long time. And in addition to the emotional stress of that circumstance, that also means that there's a significant population of people locally who are not yet connected in with, they don't know how to enroll on SNAP. They're not already on SNAP. They're definitely not working with some caseworker or case manager through Family Outreach of Amherst, to support them in that. They haven't come to the Amherst Survival Center and don't know what's going to be required when they show up. Their kids may not be enrolled in school meals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that really shapes the experience that we're in right now that is somewhat different this time in 2022 as we come into the new year than it has been at many times in the past. And I get this question all the time of like, who do we serve at the Amherst Survival Center? And my favorite answer to that, because really it's the only one that's true, is that who we serve is people who eat. And that is who comes to the Amherst Survival Center. But I think that it's really important, even separate from just who walks through our doors, which is truly some of anybody and everybody, that folks who are experiencing significant food insecurity also really include this broad swath of people in our communities. Isn't some other group or some people over here who have had this experience. This is some of all of us. And so absolutely individuals experiencing homelessness is not surprising that food insecurity often goes along with that. Immigrants or refugees who may not legally be allowed to work or have all sorts of other economic challenges there, absolutely. Seniors living on fixed incomes, people with disabilities, families, absolutely the unemployed or underemployed, and also people who are working multiple low-wage jobs. This is something that we see a lot, are folks who are really need access to the Amherst Survival Center services, really need access to get on SNAP, to access other benefits, and yet between the 3 jobs that they're working, it's a real challenge for them schedule-wise to be able to get in and access all of those things. Students, we're seeing skyrocketing rates of students facing food insecurity. There was a study of Massachusetts 4-year institutions prior to the pandemic that indicated that 1 in 4 students at 4-year public colleges and universities across the Commonwealth were experiencing food insecurity. And no doubt that's higher now. So really looking at this broad swath, and absolutely, I think it's important to acknowledge that it is due to long-term economic impacts of systemic racism through generations, lack of amassing generational wealth through all of the various processes that have systematically cut people out of welfare earning, that we are also seeing much higher rates of food insecurity among Black folks, specifically among Latino, Latina, Latinx communities, and among American Indian residents throughout. And that is true both locally and nationally. I promise this is the last slide of statistics, and then I'm going to dive in to a bit more about what we're doing at the center. I just want to acknowledge, this is an old statistic, but I believe it still holds true, that Amherst was one of 5 communities in the Valley. This was in a 2013 State of the People through the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. Amherst was one of 5 communities in the Valley to have poverty rates above 20%, along with Springfield and Holyoke. And that in 2021, actually 28% of people in Amherst versus 13.3% of people in Hampshire County overall were living below the poverty line. And for anyone who's not familiar with what this actually means, it bears digging in to the details a little bit, because we hear a lot of times that this many people are living in poverty. And I think that most of us think that means, okay, well, this many people are poor. This many people are struggling this way. But what that metric actually means is living below a federal poverty level defined income, which hasn't been changed in some absurd number of years. And currently in, sorry, that should say 2022. The 2022 federal poverty level is just shy of $28,000 a year for a family of 4. That's what that level is. It was like 27.6 something. So that actually means that someone who's making $28,002 a year or $536 a week is not meeting that definition. And so also what we know is that there is then a whole group of people in Amherst beyond that 28% that are living below that threshold, who not only are really experiencing real lived experiences of poverty, of not having the money to meet anywhere close to their basic needs, but also do not qualify for lots of benefits and resources for which that poverty line is the threshold. Somewhat not surprisingly, I think it follows then that rates of illnesses and lower life expectancies fall disproportionately on the poor, right? So, and it relates in all of these different ways. I talked about the stress and load there, which we know has enormous physical ramifications. Also, access to medical care, skimping on one's medicine, not adequately being able to heat your home, not being able to take time off of work to recover when you're sick, all of these things. We similarly see dramatically disproportionate involvement in the criminal justice system among people who are experiencing poverty. And so I think that while it is likely that we can agree on this call, and this would be a whole separate and really fabulous and really important conversation, that to adequately address poverty and even the food insecurity part of that on a true systematic root cause level, what we need are things like livable wages and affordable healthcare or universal healthcare, and easy access to quality transportation and childcare and great education and college, and all these things. Like, this is actually what we need to create an economically viable scenario in which everyone in our community can live and thrive. And so I don't make any pretense that piece is what we're doing at the Amherst Survival Center. And I also don't think that we should ever underestimate the critical importance of the work on the access to the fundamental basic needs resources in the day, like in the given day or in the given moment when you need them. And in fact, the incredible importance for folks who are experiencing this to be able to take care of themselves, to take care of their families, to take care of their basic needs and have that need met in order to be able to engage, as we so need folks to be able to, in making, in our collective democratic and other efforts to move forward in our society. And so I really see that as the piece where the Amherst Survival Center comes into all of this, is really providing for those fundamental basic needs at the time, and also really creating a space where we are building community and celebrating our collective responsibility for each other and our connections and our collective worth and that community value, lifting up each other. That I think, in addition to providing those basic needs, also kind of provides people with that warm landing place, and a place to let down one's guard and to take a breath and figure out what's next. So our mission at the center is to connect residents of Hampshire and Franklin counties with food, clothing, healthcare, wellness, and community, primarily through volunteers efforts. We operate first and foremost as a community center where anyone and everyone is welcome, and where we provide lots of different resources that can help people meet their basic needs. We provide prepared meals. Our dining room is back open, and that has been wonderful. We're also continuing the offering of to-go meals outside. We provide free groceries. We are now providing a full 14 or more days of groceries per household in our food pantry. That includes both a main grocery shop as well as a subsequent shop of produce and milk and other perishables, which has been really fabulous. That addition of that second Fresh Boost shop is very recent, and it's just starting now on delivery. We also offer daily produce and bread that folks can come, no questions asked, and come and pick up. And our food pantry groceries are now available on site via curbside pickup and also via delivery. That was a really key additional program that came out of COVID-19. And we're now delivering to about 1,000 people a month, and anticipate that rising in the coming year. We have plans for, I believe, about 5 additional routes this coming year to add new households, as well as providing that second delivery to folks along all of our routes of additional produce. We have a free walk-in medical clinic, which reopened close to a year ago, and that is on site, staffed by volunteer doctors and nurses. We have specialized services specifically for individuals who are experiencing homelessness, so laundry, lockers, a shower, mail service, computers. Anyone can use the computers, phone, fax, copy, those kinds of things. We have a resource center where staff and volunteers from other organizations come and provide services on site at the Amherst Survival Center. So things like SNAP enrollment, or case management through a homeless services organization, or help applying for fuel assistance. So all different things like that to, as best as we are able, provide kind of a one-stop shop access to basic needs. And then our community activities, which has been one of the most beautiful pieces of being able to finally reopen our indoor dining, has been the reinvigoration of these community activities. And these run the gamut. A couple weeks ago, a few folks led a music workshop that resulted in kind of an impromptu band, and including a whole bunch of people playing instruments that they both had and had never played before, like performing for folks in the dining room. It was pretty fabulous. We have office hours with elected officials. We have had a healing from trauma workshop recently, art and expressing one's culture and family through art. And so whole mix of different things, sewing workshops, cooking classes, those kinds of things. And then I will mention here, because I imagine it will come up elsewhere, clothing and housewares. We used to offer, and will again someday, offer our community store, which is basically a free thrift store. Unfortunately, we had to close it at the beginning of COVID, and we haven't yet been able to reopen it because we are kind of busting at the seams of our building, and the space that had been where the community store was is now where we are doing the grocery deliveries out of. So we're trying to continue to address that need. We have some essential clothing and kind of camping items for folks experiencing homelessness. We're working on doing some pop-ups this winter for things like winter coats and boots, and we're doing warm winter accessories for kids this month. So kind of a mix of different things, as well as connecting folks with Salvation Army vouchers, which we now provide a couple times a week, but our community store is not open yet. And all of this that we make available, I think really there's the stuff, and then there's the how of the access and kind of what that experience is for folks who are coming. And at that core is the fair and equitable distribution of goods and services, and really this universal access model that everyone gets to take part in what we have. And we're really aiming at every juncture to make things as easy and as stigma-free as possible, to ask as few questions as possible, respecting people's dignity, respecting people's privacy, letting folks tell us what they need and not questioning it. And really kind of operating from this standpoint that if we all give what we can and we ask for what we need, that together there is enough. And this universal access model, and this idea that actually what we have, that there's no means test or eligibility to get this or to get that, is pretty fundamentally different from most other social services or resources. But one of the things that it does is it means that we truly have a community space where everybody can come, and people who have different challenges and different needs and are looking for different things or just need company or a friend that day can all come and take part and share in the resources that we have. And the other thing that it means is that it removes a whole bunch of hoops, these really kind of artificial hoops between someone who quote unquote really needs something and would qualify by whatever, series of metrics we might put out there, to really just mean that folks can come in. And I don't know if roughly 4 years in, I can give you a number, except to say that it's a lot of people. The number of folks who show up at the Amherst Survival Center with some like either superbly organized or like really tattered folder of like all of these papers, and walk in and are like, please, like, I need help, and just start diving into this situation that they're in, whether it's a divorce or there was a house fire or so-and-so lost their job or an illness or like all of these pieces. And I just think I have to ask, like, what would it be like for me if on my worst day, on the day of some like major life challenge, that I had to explain all of what was going on and make a case to the checkout person at the grocery store in order to get a box of cereal and some milk and some making for sandwiches for my kids, right? And I think it's like, those two things shouldn't go together. If somebody wants to tell their story because it's important for them to get it off their chest, we're all ears. If somebody wants to tell their story because there may be other things that we could help connect them in with, we're all ears. But if someone wants to tell their story or thinks that they need to tell their story in order to meet their basic needs, that should not be a corollary. That should not be something that's required. And I think this universal access approach is really, really essential in terms of supporting folks to come and not need to do that and just be trusted when they walk through the door, that they're there for the right reason, whatever that reason is, and that we're glad to see them on that day. So we could not do any of this without the truly incredible support from this broader community. And so as much as we operate as a universal access establishment where everyone is welcome, we also offer, I'm trying to figure out what the corollary of that would be, but the universally supported, that it is truly made by and for this broader community. We are currently relying on the incredible time and skills of more than 300 volunteers each year, close to 200 each week. We rely on $2.5 million roughly of in-kind contributions. Most of that is donated food. So when we think about like the skyrocketing costs at the grocery store of food, just what we're able to provide because of that in-kind contribution. And that amounts for about 65% of our total revenue. Of the revenue that is cash, more than 60% of that money comes from individual people writing checks in all different amounts, from a couple bucks to a couple thousand and everywhere in between and above. And this is often something that really surprises people. People often think that we get our money from the government. And while I will acknowledge that last year, I think we got, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I want to say around 20% of our revenue was funds from the government. That was very, very unique to what I have affectionately started calling COVID magic money. Because it was this brief window in time in a couple of years when I feel like collectively our government recognized that food insecurity was a problem, and that actually community-based organizations that were connecting real people to real food and meeting those needs were really essential in addressing that issue. However, prior to the pandemic, we were looking at 3 to 6% of our annual revenue. And that was of a smaller budget, and we have no reason to think that that's not where we're headed very promptly. So it truly is at every level a community-based model with folks who come to us and connect and give and support the center for all different reasons. And that's really critical in terms of what we're able to then turn that support into and provide. But it is also completely essential in terms of having a space where people with dramatically different life experiences get to know each other, where people who are experiencing food insecurity are able to help stand next to and pass out lunches with someone who has lived with wealth, and build genuine human connection and relationships where people with different abilities, people with really different backgrounds, and just who live in different Amhersts or different realities of our broader Hampshire County. And so that piece of the community building that comes from everybody being able to contribute in the ways that work for them, whether that's coming with a group or with an aid worker and bagging bread or packaging up produce, or breaking down our cardboard, or helping folks in the food pantry, or volunteering as a nurse and or a medical person in our clinic. All of these things are what make the center go. So I can come back to this, but I just always like to leave with how can you get involved, and then we'll turn it over to questions. But my first and foremost of how you can get involved is to come eat, to bring a friend, to be a part of the community that is the Amherst Survival Center. Help someone who sign up for the food pantry yourself, or help someone else to sign up, and that it is really by this being accessible to community that it feels more accessible and like something that someone else can do. New volunteers are absolutely needed. We need folks who are able to volunteer 2 to 3 hours a week for a couple of months. Spread the word, just kind of normalize that this is a place that people get food, and where this is available. This is a place where you can go hang out, where we have really pretty good coffee and a fabulous lunch for 4 days a week. And to donate, we're relying really heavily, in some ways now more than ever, on food drives. We're seeing significant shortages of a lot of key items in our food pantry, and so really welcome food drives. If you're interested in hosting one, reach out to us at info@amherstsurvival.org, and we can get you specific things that we need. And absolutely, and especially at this time of year, we are, as I mentioned, really looking to secure financial donations that will allow us to keep our programs going strong throughout this coming year. So I invite all of you to think about what would be meaningful and significant to you, and really, really appreciate you having me here and the chance to talk further. So with that, I guess let me take this off so that I can actually see everybody. And I would, just love to open it up for questions or anything else that I can offer.
Thank you very much. That was really, I'm always fascinated. I learn something every time I hear you talk or whatever, or when I used to hear Mindy. I mean, it was just, it's just a very special place. And I'm sure most people here have been, and it's something else to go in, and you do feel comfortable for the most part, So are there any questions right now from anybody, or comments or something?
It looks like Susan has her hand raised.
Susan Millinger? Oh.
And then Barbara.
Okay, Susan?
Thank you very, very much for taking the time to educate all of us. And I wanted to say that, when I was volunteering regularly in the free clinic, one of the things that I really loved was the volunteer milieu, where there were active professors, retired professors, homeless people, all working side by side, and I couldn't tell who was who.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really so different from any other place I had ever worked or volunteered. And I'm so glad that spirit continues. And then I have a question for you, and that is, as we head into the holiday season, where, every day I get at least 5 different requests for donations in my mailbox, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. If we wanted to do in-kind donations, if we're hosting a gathering like the holiday party for the league, what could we ask people to bring that, feminine hygiene products, or a package of diapers, or what are the things that we could collect and then drop off to you?
Great, thank you so much. So I would say that right now, our most significantly needed items are actually grains for our food pantry. We are in really significant need of pasta, particularly anything that's not just spaghetti, although right now we'll even gladly take spaghetti. So pasta, rice, and any cereals are some of the things that are most needed items. But Susan, I think the other part of what I want to address that you asked is, I think what you're feeling and what a lot of folks are feeling is this stretch of, I think most of us who make charitable contributions, right? We give because we want something in the world to be different than it is right now. And we're trying to use this resource that we've got to do that. And you're like, okay, well, here's this resource that I got, and I want all these things to be different. And how do I split that around? But I think both the push and the offer that I'll give around that is to give what you can, and that truly the Amherst Survival Center it is just like, it is amazing to me, the degree to which it is everybody giving what they can that makes it happen. And what that is all different levels for different people. I have a longtime volunteer who likes to say, give until it feels good. And I love that framing of it, because I think really, and there are lots of really critically important causes, and I'm, not saying that, we're this over X, Y, or Z other thing, but I think that truly is the thing. If everybody in our community gave what they could, it makes it go, and we'll be able to keep offering. But yes, also pasta, rice, and cereal. Yeah.
Okay,
Barbara?
Yeah.
So I have, I think, two quick questions. When you were giving out, thank you so much for your presentation. I sat next to you the other night at the Augusta Savage, and I didn't introduce myself to you but I would now.
We were both wearing masks. It was, now that you say that, I'm like, oh, right, I do recognize your forehead.
I was wondering, when I was listening to the increase in the statistics of free lunches and hunger and so forth, and I've noticed the fluctuation over the years in the schools as well. Is there something that changes the population, or is that the population that is that a stable population that gets in worse shape? Or it's like, for a while there were housing voucher programs that would bring people to Amherst, so it was good that we had more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great question that I don't feel like I have enough information on the data behind the school lunch numbers to be able to answer that
I mean, your numbers
intelligently. But I think that at the Amherst Survival Center, I think that it's a real mix of things. I think that folks who have been struggling for a long time are absolutely worse off. Even certainly for folks who are working, and absolutely for folks who are living on any kind of benefit assistance, that income has not come anywhere close to keeping a pace with cost of basic essentials to live. And that component of it, we just saw dramatically, kind of with inflation rising, just the folks who were coming in just needed more, right? Their SNAP dollars were going like just not as far. As I also said, though, we are certainly experiencing, and I think this is evidenced in those both statewide and regional food insecurity statistics, of that really enormous increase in just a couple of years, like 2019 to 2022. Is that there also is absolutely a new cohort of, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but a whole new group of people who are experiencing food insecurity for the first time. I don't have any reason to believe that that's a population of people that is coming to Amherst. I think because those differences, that increase in those percentages, it's true in Amherst, it's true in Hampshire County, it's true in Massachusetts, and it's true in a lot of other states across the country. So I think that that's more looking at overall economic capacity of lower income households.
Yeah, actually, one
Folks
of
that
my
were
neighbors,
just making it.
Let me just make a positive comment. Now, there was a grant that the schools of Amherst had, and they have free lunch. It is not just for certain people, it's open. That's the elementary, junior high, and the middle school and the high school. I was
Maybe that's why I can't find the more updated statistic for that, is because now they give it to everybody.
I don't know where else it is, but yeah.
Yeah.
so also one of my neighbors put out something in the neighborhood that, people who were volunteers are now clients.
That's possible.
And people who have been volunteers have always also been participants, and vice versa. That is, very much the experience from which this organization was founded and started, was by people who needed the services and the resources that the Amherst Survival Center could provide, and tried to figure out a way between themselves very, very successfully to make that come to fruition and manage it for a long time. And your point is absolutely accurate, Barbara, that there are lots of people who previously did not need food support or help who now do. And yeah, that is definitely a reality that we're seeing.
Okay,
Okay,
well, I'm going to
Marcy-
let somebody else go, and then I'm put myself
Marcy,
at the
oh yeah,
end of the
Marcy,
line.
and then Ash, and then Martha.
Oh, actually, I think Ash is before me in the lineup. I'll let him go and then I'll
Well,
go.
your hand was up first, so that's why I was calling. you, Okay,
Oh, how'd he skip the line?
he's got it.
Thank you, Marcy. That's good. I just, first a comment and then a question. I think that the model that you have of having those who are in need also serve as volunteers and provide a service is an enormous breakthrough, as it were, a really, really important element, because actually providing others a service is psychologically so important. So it's not just you're needy, but you're able to help. And I know that you do that. I mean, I know people who have, or do both, and that's just just a commendation, because very few organizations really understand how to do that and do it well. But the other is a question. You mentioned that just under 30% of this, those in Amherst are below the poverty line, which is in itself obviously ridiculously low. And I wondered if you have any idea what proportion of those are students, because the student profile in terms of income and poverty is really skews our understanding of what's going on in this town when you look at it. And I just wonder if there's any, if you have any insight into that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the school data would be a good indicator. That, of course, is only going to, so I don't have the direct answer to your question of that. I think school data would be a good indicator that would only, of course, represent families with kids, and that doesn't include lots of other adults without school-age children who are in the community.
Oh, it actually includes a lot of graduate students.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was meaning school, like public K-12 data would give us, one picture of the non-university student data in a way to do that, because census data includes everyone who fills out the census. But I am sure it skews it some. And I have two thoughts on that. One is, I don't know how much it does based on what my understandings of our overall food insecurity rates among students. I don't know that they're that different. I think it's a little bit worse. And I think the other point that I would like to make somewhat carefully is that these are also folks who live in our community. And I think there's an interesting piece that as a college town, we kind of have to grapple with, right? Or like having folks come for this, and then what are we set up for as a community to provide for those students? And certainly that absolutely needs to fall on the colleges and universities themselves to provide for needs of their students and to make sure that the aid packages and all these other things work for the folks that are coming. And I think that, I guess I'll just say that I think the Amherst Survival Center, we're a bit in the business of like breaking down artificial barriers between different categories of people in terms of who gets what. And I think that also somewhat exists with students and not. So it's not an answer to the data or the statistics question. And I do just have to say one thing to your earlier comment of the model of people utilizing services, giving as volunteers. first of all, I certainly can take absolutely no credit for that. We can thank Jane Halapa and Vanjie Westcott and the amazing force of, it was like a whole group of women who started the Amherst Survival Center 45, 46 years ago. But I think it's important to note that it was actually folks with more economic means who then got let in at some point, not the other way around, effectively. So I think that that's actually really important. It was, this organization was started by people of very meager economic means who had a lot else to offer, but not a lot of money. And it's really been actually over time, the transition has been the other direction of then saying, okay, actually, this can be a space where also people can connect across difference. And that means people who have different needs, people who may have need to connect, to provide service, to get to know their neighbors and other things if they don't also need food. But yes, I do think I 100% agree that it's certainly one of my favorite parts about getting to spend time at the center.
Marcy?
So this is fabulous. Lev, I feel like you're channeling Vanjie, and just very beautiful. And I'm glad you responded to Ash, because I was also going to respond. So for those of you who don't know this part of my life, I actually was on staff at the Survival Center in the late 90s and early 2000s for 4 years, and then was active for a long time after that, and served on the board with several of the folks who are on the screen too. And there has always been this blurring of lines between who's helping whom and who needs what. And it was always the sort of sense that we could all share the same way Lev was talking about it. So those are old, beautiful patterns that have continued, even though, you know, your demands are so much greater, the numbers are so much greater. It's really hard to keep that up, but everybody was considered a volunteer back in the day, whether or not you were a potential volunteer, even if you weren't an actualized volunteer. And that meant if you were in a wheelchair, if you were homeless, if you didn't speak English, no matter what, you were a volunteer or potentially a volunteer. And one thing, Lev, that felt different, which to me is a huge, huge positive thing, is, and it's not like it was said differently, it just wasn't said, was the thing you said about poverty is due to the long-term economic impacts of systemic racism. And that, there was never an analysis about poverty. It was like everybody was just working really hard to get through the day. But Mindy started with a kind of more political articulation and working with legislation. I don't know, maybe Cheryl did too, but you have really taken that further. And when I drive by and I see a Black Lives Matter sign in front of the Survival Center, that is just so fabulous, because that kind of political, social understanding of what poverty is and how to fix it, you know, it's really a systemic thing that needs fixing on a systemic policy level. So 3 cheers to you, and I'm so happy that you're still enthusiastic. I hope you stay there a long time. And I also just want to make a shout out that you had this way of being so creative during COVID, and you being creative with the space and what needed to happen inside and outside the spaces that you had. It's ironic that the building is not big enough given how much went into making that building. And I'm in my mind thinking of like, could we create another little, you know, push out another room for, because the clothing piece is a loss, not just to the folks who use it, but to all of us who have things to donate. And similar to the loss of Trash to Treasures, where it was a huge recycling opportunity that stuff now ends up in the landfill that didn't used to and doesn't need to. So anyway, I'll pause because there's just so much to say, but I'm really, really proud of what you're doing and how you've taken the legacy and just made it even better. So thanks.
Okay. Martha and then Joan.
Okay. Well, yes, well, let me just add my thanks, Lev, for educating us so much about everything. And one thing that you mentioned was about people who are working 2 or even 3 low-paying jobs and juggling everything so they don't even have time to, say, apply for benefits and so on. And I was just wondering, are you familiar with the experiment or the program that was done in Stockton, California? There was I think
Universal basic income, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, there was a pot of money, I think it might have come from a foundation and so on. And so in one particular zip code that was mainly low income, people could apply, and then they had a lottery. And then the people who, won the lottery could, I don't remember how many families it was, whether it was 20 or 50 or more, but they would receive $500 a month for, I think, 2 years, no questions asked, no justification. And then at the end, there was a survey of, whether their income status or anything had changed. And, a lot of people criticized that, people will just then, stop working and laze around and everything. And instead, the unemployment rate dropped. And the reason was that people who were just juggling all these low-income jobs and couldn't afford to take time off to try to better themselves were able to take time off to do job searches, to go for job interviews, maybe buy a decent set of clothes for the job interviews or something, or pay off their car loans so that then they could drive to get better jobs and so on. So that it really meant an overall, jump in improvement that you just can't do when you're only worrying about where the next meal is coming from and so on. I was quite impressed with that experiment, and I don't know as it's that widely known.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, there has been some fascinating research both in the US and more so some larger scale studies in a few countries in Europe around universal basic income. And I think the data has really been similar to that example that you shared, of just what it made possible for people. And I think we saw a tiny piece of that with the earned income tax credit during, or sorry, is that what it was called? The additional child tax credit that was available during COVID, and the difference that made for people, and people talking about what they used it for and where it went. And I think, in addition to kind of all the factors that you're sharing, there's this other layer of like, it costs a lot of money to be poor when you don't have enough money to actually get the things that you need. You're piecing together all different things from different places, or you're buying a couple of items at the local convenience store, or you're doing this, right? Like there's a lot of, you continue to rent and can't get anywhere close to being able to buy a home, right? Like all of these other small and large scale ways. So I think you're getting at a really key piece here. Very different from universal basic income, but there is a really exciting bill that was recently passed in Massachusetts that will create a pilot project around ending the cliff effect. So not universal basic income, but another really significant challenge, which is that when people earn $1 more than whatever the threshold is for a given benefit, they lose all of their benefits. And so there's actually, for every family or household configuration, the calculus is slightly different, but there's a whole area, sort of a swath then, where by earning more money, you actually have less money every month. And it's very well documented that because of this, people end up having to deny extra hours, like not say yes to extra hours at work or decline raises. My previous role had someone decline a promotion because if they took that promotion that they were incredibly well qualified for, it would have meant the loss of those benefits. So totally separate from universal basic income, but just another important kind of federal benefit, or in this case, state benefit that's being explored in Massachusetts.
Joan?
Lev, I thought I knew what this Amherst Survival Center did, but I'm blown away by the breadth of services that you provide. So just wanted to say that I was a little bit variation of what Ash was talking about. I was surprised that you mentioned students at public universities. Aren't students on meal plans that provide for their food? Were you talking about more about graduate students?
It's both. And it really depends on different schools and universities do financial aid very differently and operate their meal plans very differently. But it is quite common and certainly true at UMass, for example, that on-campus students can select between a variety of different meal plans. I believe that the smallest meal plan is, I'm not sure if it's 7 or 10 meals a week, up to like a full unlimited plan, and there are different levels. And so, of course, if a student is choosing to buy that meal plan because they prefer to eat whatever, in other ways that is not in the dining hall, then like by all means, and that's great. But if it's because they're not able to afford more food, then that's a significant problem. And that is true across the Commonwealth and elsewhere in the country as well. That's by no means a local only problem, but is something I'm actively involved. There's a great group of folks on UMass campus kind of working on food security issues with students that I've really appreciated being a part of, and looking at all the different facets of ways to address that issue.
And then the only other question I had was, what do we have to do to get the federal poverty level increased? Because, what legislation, what has to happen? Because
increase the minimum wage for one thing.
But you're talking about just actually what that level is, that marker of federal poverty level. I know, and it's absurd. In fact, there are like all these standard federal benefits that now the threshold for them is like 150% of FPL or 200% of FPL, because 100% of FPL is just so low. So I don't know the answer. I think that might be a question for Jim McGovern. I'm sure he knows whether or not he thinks it's in it, remotely politically within reach.
It's legislation, yeah.
But it's an important one. It really, it artificially, whatever the opposite of inflates, it artificially deflates our sense of the economic security of the country.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Barbara, you had another question?
If I may, as other people have said, you're such an all service kind of thing that it made me think. I learned of something just last night called community paramedicine. And I thought you guys had a clinic once a week or something. Is that not so? Right. And have you ever heard of this medicine thing? It's, and then I looked it up today. It's sort of a little bit around the country where the EMS, the emergency services, have sort of like a CRESS instead of an emergency thing, where they respond. And I just wondered if anybody here had been talking about it. They reduced homelessness, they reduced the number of trips to the ER and all that kind of stuff in significant ways. And I mean, it costs money to do it, but it also saves a ton of money. And I wondered if anybody had ever brought that up even here. I don't even know where to go. Maybe Jennifer can tell me. But you've not heard of it, so I won't put you on the spot anymore. Watch out for it. It's really great. And I'm going to try and ask other people to find out if we can get on that bandwagon.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to also say thank you, Lev, for such an informative presentation and your amazing leadership and expertise. Very grateful. If I may, I just want to share a little story about Judy Brooks, may she rest in peace, who was my next door neighbor. On this topic. It's not about the survival center, but it's about food insecurity. So every August, our neighborhood has a block party where about 50 neighbors of all ages, lots of kids, get together in the street and we play games and have a barbecue, three-legged races and, you know, eating donuts off of trees and blah, blah, blah. Well, one of the regular games is an egg toss. Get further and further away and you're throwing an egg to your partner until it breaks. And Judy came outside and she said, y'all got to stop this. You're throwing food on the road and there are people who don't have enough food to eat. I just wanted to share that story.
And that was my story too. With Judy used to drag me into the survival center to help register people, and that's how I got involved with the league. You know, in a sense. So yeah, that's why it's the Judy Brooks conversation.
I just thought I'd share that little anecdote. Thanks.
Yes. Anybody else have any questions? Well, I think that we really, really appreciate you, and we appreciate the Survival Center even more than we have. We really, you just are phenomenal, and we're so happy that you are. And you know, so we need to get the word out to, you know, come and I, especially when you do the, you know, the diapers and the other things, I always try to contribute to those because I know how expensive some of these things are for people who are making it, but then that's an expense that's very high, you know, or different kinds of things. So, and yes, we are accumulating clothes. So let us know when clothing thing, you know, it opens again, you know, because I always love to volunteer to take clothes, some clothes I've never worn or whatever, you know, I can just clean them or wash them and just make sure. That was a joy to know that they were going to people who really wanted them, you know, and not being torn up and put into rags. So like some of the places that you donate. So, you know.
Yeah.
Can I just throw in one more thing? I'm not around to do this myself, but I really encourage you all to go have lunch, especially now that you can go inside if you feel comfortable eating inside. It is such a wonderful experience. There's plenty of food for everyone, and if anything dissolves the me, us, them, there isn't enough. Someone needs it more than I do. All of that feeling of separation. Having lunch together is the key to kind of dissolving that sense of separation, and it's a really great lunch too.
It's the best lunch in town.
It's the best lunch in town.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate all of your time and engagement with this, and truly all of the kind words about the center really should and are directed at our incredible staff and incredible volunteers. And I think I will just take a moment as we close to say that we talk a lot about the really phenomenal contributions of our volunteers, and undoubtedly we could not open on any day without them. It's just, it wouldn't, we are truly volunteer powered. And I want to also just really kind of hold up the incredible contributions of our staff as well, who are the folks that are there every single day and have been over the last couple of years, which has been a pretty nutty time to be in this work. And they're the folks that are making the meaningful volunteer opportunities and are also structuring things to make it so that when volunteers come in, they know what to do and where to go. Unless you've been around for as long as Leslie has, and then, you you just walk in and do what needs to be done. But truly, and we are really, really lucky. We've got a phenomenal team of folks. So just want to pass along those accolades to our incredible volunteers, our staff, and really everyone that shows up every day and kind of brings their best self. There's a whole lot of people dealing with a whole lot of hard in the rest of the world who kind of like show up and give something with their presence, which is pretty amazing. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lev. We really appreciate it.
Survey.